I watched my newborn lose his precious life, harmed by the very woman I called my best friend. She blamed me for her own tragic choices, claiming breakdown to escape justice. We departed together in a haze of tragedy and despair, but when I opened my eyes, the harsh fluorescent lights and the smell of hospital antiseptic filled my lungs. I was back on the day I gave birth, and this time, I would protect my child at all costs. Chloe, you really just need to do a natural birth with me. What is the point of a C-section? It's just a surgical cash grab. The moment my eyes fluttered open, the first thing I saw was Jenna sitting on the edge of my hospital bed, shoving a greasy French fry into her mouth while lecturing me. I turned my head, my vision blurred for a second before the sterile white walls of St. Mary's Women and Children's Hospital came into sharp focus. The steady beep of the fetal monitor echoed in the small room. My heart began to race, beating erratically against my ribs. My hands instinctively reached down, my fingers curling tightly around the crisp edges of the hospital blanket. Was I given a second chance? Jenna didn't notice my pale face or my trembling hands. She just kept chewing, entirely absorbed in her own self-righteous monologue. These doctors are just pushing C-sections on everyone because they get bigger payouts from the insurance companies. You know that, right? It's a complete scam. In my past life, I hadn't listened to her unsolicited advice. I couldn't. I had a congenital heart condition, and my cardiologist had strictly advised against the immense cardiovascular strain of a vaginal delivery. But Jenna had always thought I was just being dramatic. As for Jenna herself, ever since she found out she was pregnant, she had used it as an excuse to gorge on fast food, pastries, and milkshakes, claiming she needed to nourish the baby. She had gained nearly 60 pounds. Consequently, her baby was measuring dangerously large, an estimated 9 pounds. Her obgyn had strongly recommended a C-section, especially since the ultrasound showed the umbilical cord wrapped twice around the baby's neck. It was a high-risk situation waiting to happen. I stared at her now, watching her devour the rest of her double cheeseburger, and forced my voice to remain steady. I think it is best to listen to the doctors, Jenna. She finished her food, aggressively wiping the grease from her lips with a napkin. Whatever. I'm too tired to argue with you. But when your kid ends up slow and groggy from all that spinal anesthesia, don't say I didn't warn you. She rolled her eyes, grabbed her designer purse, and walked out of the room. The moment the door clicked shut, the tension in my hands finally released. I took several deep, desperate breaths of the stale hospital air to ground myself. Then, I immediately threw off the covers and shoved my swollen feet into my slippers. I needed to transfer hospitals. Now, I had just reached the doorway when my husband Thomas walked in. He was carrying a tote bag filled with snacks and last-minute baby supplies. He lifted the bag, offering a warm smile. "Did you need something else?" He reached out to guide me back to the bed, but I grabbed his forearm with a firm grip. My voice came out rushed, frantic. "I want to transfer. I don't want to give birth here anymore." Thomas looked at me utterly bewildered, trying to process my sudden panic. "Chloe, your surgery is in 2 hours. Leaving right now isn't exactly safe." We were currently at St. Mary's, just a 15-minute drive across town was Mercy General Hospital. While everyone in our social circle swore that St. Mary's had the best luxury maternity ward, I couldn't care less about amenities right now. I was fighting for my baby's life. Thomas, thinking I was just experiencing severe pre-surgery jitters, gently squeezed my hand. "Hey, don't be scared. I'm going to be waiting right outside those doors the entire time." I opened my mouth to argue, but a sudden intense contraction ripped through my lower abdomen. According to the monitor, I was having contractions every 10 minutes. I was only about 1 centimeter dilated, nowhere near ready for active labor, but the baby had naturally triggered early labor signs, which was why we had come to the hospital ahead of schedule. Seeing my face drain of color as I clutched my heavy belly, Thomas hurriedly helped me sit down in the bedside chair. "I'm going to go find the nurse and see if they can move the surgery up." I caught his wrist, pulling him back. I waited for the peak of the contraction to pass, breathing through the pain. I looked him dead in the eye and took a deep breath. If I told you that I've lived this exact day before, would you believe me? Thomas stared at my face. The room was silent for 3 agonizing seconds. Then, without missing a beat, he said, I believe you. I knew how insane it sounded. Half of me was still questioning if the vivid, painful memories were just a horrific, hormone-induced nightmare. But I couldn't afford to gamble with my child's life. I pulled Thomas close and in a hushed, trembling voice, told him everything that happened in my past life. The longer I spoke, the darker his expression became. His jaw clenched, and without asking a single follow-up question, he pulled out his phone. He immediately called an old college friend, who was completing his residency at Mercy General. Their maternity ward wasn't nearly as overbooked as St. Mary's, and within minutes his friend had secured us a private room. Thomas didn't hesitate. He swiftly packed up all the bags he had just unpacked and helped me out of the room. However, just as we stepped out of the hospital's main sliding doors, we practically collided with Jenna's mother-in-law, Mrs. Higgins, who was just arriving, dressed in a pristine tweed jacket and dripping in pearls. She looked us up and down with obvious disdain. Spotting our luggage, she raised a perfectly plucked eyebrow. Where on earth are you two going? Didn't Jenna tell me you were scheduled to have surgery today? I frowned, a deep sense of dread washing over me. I quickly fabricated a story. Oh, the room was feeling a bit claustrophobic. We're just taking a walk to get moving. We brought the bags down because, well, you know how things can go missing. I absolutely could not let Jenna's family know we were transferring. At least, not yet. I was genuinely terrified that Jenna, in her bizarre obsession with our friendship, would follow me. Mrs. Higgins let out a condescending little laugh. Right, Jenna mentioned you two have been struggling lately. Better to be safe with your belongings. I'm heading up to see my daughter-in-law now. Watching Mrs. Higgins strut toward the elevators, we didn't waste another second. Thomas helped me into our SUV, and we sped toward Mercy General. Her jab about our struggles was laughable. Thomas and I were completely self-made, running a highly successful online business. Jenna's husband, Mark, came from old money, and Mrs. Higgins had a lucrative government pension. Because of their generational wealth, they constantly looked down on us. What they didn't know was that our quiet little business netted us well over a few $100,000 a year. It wasn't private jet money, but we were incredibly comfortable. I had just never felt the need to flaunt it to Jenna. She had always been arrogant and competitive. We were only friends because, historically, I was too laid back to call her out on her passive-aggressive behavior. I always knew her friendship was superficial, but I never imagined it could be dangerous. As soon as we settled into our new room at Mercy General, my phone lit up. It was Jenna. I let it ring out, then permanently blocked her number. I had been so frantic during the transfer that I had forgotten to do it earlier. Once the baby is born, let's break the lease on the warehouse and move our inventory to a new location. I'm terrified she's going to find us, I whispered, staring at my phone. Thomas, who had been looking down at his screen, suddenly handed it to me. I was just looking at commercial real estate. Take a look and see which district you prefer. I stared at him, genuinely stunned. His ability to adapt to my dramatic confession was faster than I could have ever anticipated. Thomas and I were college classmates. Our story wasn't some epic romance of high school sweethearts. We bumped into each other a few years after graduation, started dating because it was comfortable, and eventually, because we were at that age, we got married. It was practical. Thinking about this, Thomas suddenly looked up and asked, in the past life, when the baby, where was I? Logically, he should have been by my side in the recovery room. Jenna shouldn't have had the opportunity to sneak in, but our relationship hadn't been intensely passionate back then. On that day, his ex-girlfriend, who suffered from severe mental health issues, had also been admitted to the hospital's psych ward after a breakdown. He told me he was going to check on her. I didn't stop him. We were adults, and I wasn't the jealous type. Hearing this, Thomas's eyes darkened. He looked at me with an unreadable expression. I promise you, Chloe, this time, I am not going anywhere. In that moment, for the first time in our marriage, my heart fluttered with a strange, profound affection, but my relief was short-lived. Just as the nurses were wheeling my bed toward the surgical wing, I heard heavy footsteps slapping against the floor. I turned my head. It was Jenna, her massive belly protruding. She was rushing toward the pre-op doors, her face red with anger. I transferred too. We made a pact to have our babies together. Why did you lie to me? The nurses around us smiled, completely oblivious, joking about our cute best friend goals. Only I felt chilled to the bone. Was my child destined to pass away no matter what I did? Throughout the entire surgical prep, the anesthesiologist noted my high heart rate, constantly murmuring words of comfort, assuming I was just experiencing standard surgical anxiety. Under the procedure, my lower half was entirely numb to pain. But as the obstetrician worked, I could still feel the intense pressure and tugging inside my abdomen. The moment I heard the sharp, piercing cry, I gasped. "Is it a boy?" The doctor chuckled, perhaps thinking I was harboring some old-fashioned gender preference. "Yes, Mom. It's a healthy baby boy." I didn't care about the gender. I just needed to know that this wasn't all some elaborate hallucination. After the nurses quickly cleaned and swaddled him, they brought him over to my chest while the surgeon finished up. I only needed one look. The twin hair whorls on the crown of his head, the exact same curve of his tiny nose. It was him. It was the exact same baby from my past life. As the nurse gently lifted him to take him to the warming station, I grabbed her scrub top. "Please. Tell my husband outside. Tell him not to let the baby out of his sight, not even for a second." I remembered the trauma of my past life so vividly. Shortly after I had been moved to recovery, Jenna had gone into active labor. She labored for 3 agonizing hours. By the time her baby was finally delivered, he was unresponsive. They immediately inserted an oxygen tube. Days later, a specialist confirmed the child had suffered severe developmental issues due to prolonged lack of oxygen. Jenna had lost her composure entirely. She screamed at everyone in the hospital, "You doctors are incompetent. My baby was perfectly fine. You're just punishing me because I didn't pay for your expensive surgery. I'm suing all of you." But it was entirely her own fault. The nurses and doctors had pleaded with her to agree to an emergency C-section when the fetal heart rate plummeted. Her mother-in-law, Mrs. Higgins, had adamantly refused to sign the consent forms, insisting that natural births didn't cost extra, required less recovery time, and produced smarter children. Usually natural births are wonderful, but Jenna's physiological conditions made it high risk for her child. The doctors were legally bound until it was too late. When I tried to comfort her back then, she turned her anger on me. "You're just rubbing it in. You knew this would happen. You got your safe surgery, and you didn't even try to force me to get one. You wanted me to have an unhealthy child. You are the most selfish person on this earth." I never imagined she would weaponize her emotional distress and use it as an excuse to sneak into my room and harm my perfectly healthy newborn. This time, I absolutely refused to let history repeat itself. But fate always has a way of throwing a wrench into the best-laid plans. When I was finally wheeled into my recovery room, Thomas was already there, holding our freshly bathed son, and standing right next to him was Jenna. She was reaching out, stroking my baby's cheek. "He's so handsome. He looks exactly like Thomas." As she lifted her hand, I literally held my breath. "I didn't expect you to have a boy," Jenna continued, turning to look at me as they wheeled my bed into place. "My mother-in-law swore you were carrying a girl based on how you were showing, and you always said you wanted a daughter. Did you lie to me about that too?" "I did prefer girls, but boy or girl, this was my child." I could hear the hostility laced in her casual tone. I needed her out of my room immediately. "Aren't you about to give birth?" I asked, my voice cold. "Don't you have prep work to do?" From the moment I transferred hospitals without telling her, she should have taken the hint that I was cutting ties. Did I really have to spell it out for her? and I still couldn't comprehend how or why she had managed to follow me here. Jenna pulled her hand away from my son and protectively rubbed her own belly. She glared at me. Why did you suddenly run off? When I heard from a nurse that you were leaving, I demanded they induce me right away. We made a promise to go through this together. Jenna was already 2 days past her due date. I had gone into labor a few days early, because she was impatient and deeply obsessed with our twisted rivalry. She had essentially pressured the doctors at St. Mary's into giving her medication, and then transferred when she found out I left. Her unilateral, irrational decision had somehow morphed into a promise in her mind. In the past, my non-confrontational nature would have forced me to say something polite to preserve the peace. But in this life, she wasn't getting anywhere near me. When and how you give birth is a medical decision between you and your doctors, Jenna. It has absolutely nothing to do with me. Jenna's face flushed with indignation. Excuse me? What kind of attitude is that? Aren't you happy we get to share a room and experience this together? I looked her dead in the eye. You're not giving birth to my child. Why would I care? Jenna choked, entirely unprepared for my hostility. She looked at me immobile from the waist down, and let out a sharp scoff. People always say that medication makes you lose sharp thinking. You're the perfect example. Honestly, with all those drugs pumping through your system, your kid is probably going to end up at the bottom of his class anyway. Attacking me was one thing. Cursing my newborn child crossed a line I didn't even know I had. I closed my eyes and pointed a trembling finger toward the hallway. If you have nothing productive to do, get out of my sight. I'm exhausted and I need to sleep. Furious, Jenna stepped forward and aggressively swatted my outstretched hand. The IV needle was still embedded in the back of my hand, steadily dripping fluids. Her strike hit it directly. A sharp pain shot up my arm, and I gasped. Are you out of your mind? I yelled. I pulled my hand back. The needle had been dislodged, causing fluid to leak under the skin. A purple swollen mark was already forming. I immediately pressed the nurse call button. Jenna, having never been yelled at by me before, completely lost her temper. You're the crazy one. Do you think you own this hospital? This is a semi-private room. If you can stay here, so can I. I suddenly realized with a sinking feeling that this was indeed a double occupancy room. Mercy General wasn't as overbooked as St. Mary's, but this was the last available maternity suite on the floor. If I wanted to move, I had to wait for another patient to be discharged. Bound to the bed by the procedure, I felt trapped in a cage. The helplessness was suffocating. A nurse rushed in, saw the dislodged IV, and quickly removed it, taping gauze over the mark. She strictly instructed me not to move that arm. Throughout this entire argument, Thomas had been sitting in the corner, head down, typing on his phone. He had always claimed he hated being in the middle of unnecessary drama. But if I couldn't fight back, who was going to protect us? Even the nurse couldn't stand the dynamic. She turned to Thomas. Dad, when the IV bag runs low, please press the call button for your wife. She can't move well right now. She then turned a stern eye on Jenna. The obstetrician is waiting for you in his office to discuss your induction. Your husband needs to be there as well. But Jenna had driven here alone in a hasty fit. Her mother-in-law was still driving over, and her husband Mark was out of town on a business trip, and hadn't made it back yet. Jenna stubbornly sat down on her designated hospital bed across the room. You guys just want to force me into a surgery. Well, I've made up my mind. I am doing a natural birth. Go tell the doctor that as soon as my mother-in-law gets here, you need to hook up the medication. If you try to force me into surgery, I will sue this hospital. The nurse looked utterly speechless, but bound by professional ethics, she couldn't engage in a shouting match with a patient. She simply shook her head and walked out. Just then, my son started to fuss. I looked over at Thomas. Check his diaper if he is dirty. Change him and then prepare a bottle of formula. Thomas put his phone away, grabbed the newborn diapers and the formula we had packed. Following the instructions I had shared weeks ago, he washed his hands in the basin and carefully began changing the baby. His hands were clumsy, but he was incredibly gentle. Jenna watched him from across the room for a few minutes before letting out a loud mocking snort. You guys are really so low on funds you couldn't even afford to hire a postpartum night nanny. Wow. How pathetic. Thomas froze. He turned his head slowly, his eyes showing quiet anger. Keep your mouth shut. But Jenna never knew when to stop. Why should I? Is it illegal to point out you're struggling? A grown man doing tasks, changing dirty diapers. You don't find that embarrassing? Thomas held her gaze for a long moment. Jenna, do not push me. Jenna clicked her tongue, but seeing the genuine intensity in his eyes, she finally backed down, rolling over on her bed to scroll on her phone. I fought the heavy tiredness, worried about closing my eyes. But eventually, the physical fatigue from the procedure and medication overpowered my willpower. I slipped into a quiet, dreamless sleep. I had no idea how long I was out, but it was a deep sleep until a sharp, loud cry tore through the silence and woke me up. Thomas! I called out instinctively, but there was no answer. I turned my head to look at Jenna's bed, but it was empty too. A creeping sense of unease spread through my chest, but my priority was settling my baby. I grabbed the side rails of the hospital bed, trying to pull myself up. My core had zero strength, and the fresh incision on my abdomen felt extremely sore. If a nurse hadn't walked in right then to check my vitals and change my dressings, I would have been completely stranded. "Oh, take it easy. Let me help you," she said. The nurse adjusted my pillows to a comfortable angle and then checked the baby's diaper. Sure enough, he had soiled it. Thankfully, the maternity nurses were incredibly efficient. She quickly cleaned him up and helped me mix a small bottle of formula. When she pressed down on my stomach to complete the standard medical check, the discomfort was sharp. I swallowed my complaints and politely said, "Thank you." As the nurse turned to leave, I called out to her, "Could you do me a huge favor and hand me my phone?" My phone was buried in my overnight bag. I hadn't brought it into the room earlier, and I couldn't reach it now. The nurse wasn't too busy, so she kindly obliged. While directing her to the right pocket, I asked if she had seen Thomas. She paused. A complicated, almost pitying look flashed across her eyes. I could tell she was holding something back. Finally, she spoke. "Your roommate Jenna. Her water broke suddenly. Your husband actually helped assist her down to the delivery ward. Her mother-in-law just arrived and insisted they start the medication for a vaginal delivery that fast. But the thought of her going into labor made my stomach drop. If her baby ended up with complications again, she might start her chaotic outbursts." I grabbed my phone. My first instinct was to call Thomas. Seeing husband flash on my screen, the nurse hesitated by the door. Just before the line connected, she offered a quiet word. "Women really can only rely on themselves. Loving yourself and your child is what matters most." I looked up, but she was already slipping out the door. The call connected. I was about to ask Thomas if Jenna had delivered yet, but the words caught in my throat and pivoted. "Where are you?" It was quiet on his end, but when he spoke, his voice echoed slightly. He sounded like he was in a stairwell, just outside taking a break. "Why, what is up?" He only went outside when he was under extreme stress. I had just given birth to a healthy baby boy, and we were financially secure. There was no reason for him to be stressed. His anxiety seemed entirely out of place. That lingering suspicion combined with the nurse's advice made me push the issue. "And Jenna?" "Oh," Thomas replied quickly this time. "Her water broke. She is in the delivery room, and you helped her there." "Yeah." Why on earth was it his business to step in? Waiting in that hospital bed, my anxiety rose. I immediately opened a local Facebook mom group and asked if anyone had a recommendation for a last-minute postpartum doula or night nanny. To my surprise, Jenna's mother-in-law, Mrs. Higgins, was active in the exact same group. She was probably bored waiting outside the room, and decided to comment, "Night nannies are outrageously expensive these days. Can your family even afford that?" she commented publicly. Every word she typed was dripping with her usual obnoxious display of wealth. A few moms had been in the middle of typing out recommendations for me, but her snarky comment killed the chat. A couple of kind-hearted moms jumped to my defense. "Excuse me, ma'am, but it's really none of your business." Exactly. If she is asking for a nanny, she obviously has the means to pay for one. There's no need to be so rude. I didn't hold back. I tagged her directly. "How is this any of your concern? Shouldn't you be focusing on your daughter-in-law right now? If you're so eager to brag about money, why don't you send everyone in this group some cash to prove it?" I was just calling her bluff. Who knew Mrs. Higgins would actually take the bait? She dropped 5 consecutive $200 cash transfer links into the group chat. She followed it up with, "Let me show you all what real wealth looks like. Only people who can't handle things themselves have to resort to hiring strangers." With that single sentence, she managed to offend almost every mother in the group. Not a single person clicked her links. The group admin immediately removed her from the page, but a few minutes later she reappeared. Jenna had sent her an invite link, and Mrs. Higgins was using Jenna's account to return. She must have had both phones on her in the waiting room. She instantly started complaining. "Why did you remove me? Can't handle the truth? What kind of mom group is this anyway? Sitting on your phones instead of paying attention to family." Seconds later, she was removed again. This time, Jenna's account was permanently blocked from the group too. Normally, the chat was strictly for sharing baby food recipes and parenting tips. Now the gossip was flying. Who was that person? I recognized the account that added her back. It is her daughter-in-law. I actually follow her social media. She posts high-end luxury bags every other week. Screenshots of Jenna's lavish posts started flooding the chat. "Look at this. These items cost thousands of dollars. What does her family even do for a living? I went to school with her. I heard her husband works at a bank, and the in-laws are just retired office workers. They definitely shouldn't have that kind of money. That spending is excessive. My husband has a senior job, and we barely save much after living expenses." Then someone dropped a huge comment. "Honestly, it sounds like her family is mismanaging funds." The group chat went silent for a moment. It hit me like a ton of bricks. Just last month, Jenna had casually upgraded to the newest $2,000 maxed out phone. Her husband's salary barely covered her shopping habits. Not to mention, right after they got married last year, they bought a $2 million suburban house in cash. Even with help from her in-laws, the math didn't add up. Throughout her pregnancy, she was constantly indulging in high-end spas and imported delicacies. Exactly how were they funding this lifestyle? Eventually, I found a highly rated postpartum doula named Mary through the group. She packed her bags and arrived at the hospital an hour and a half later. Right around the time Mary arrived, Jenna was finally brought back into our shared room. She didn't look nearly as composed as she had hoped. Because her baby was so large, she had suffered severe complications and required extensive medical stitches. Yet, she still tried to maintain her superior facade. "What are you looking at?" she snapped. "I'm just tired. I'll be up and walking soon. Unlike you, resting in bed." Fine. If she wanted to pretend she wasn't uncomfortable, I wasn't going to argue. The one advantage she had was that she was allowed to eat solid food immediately. Mark, her husband, had finally arrived from the airport. He rushed into the room carrying a large thermos of warm broth. He leaned down and kissed Jenna's forehead. "You did great, babe." Jenna hugged him, playing the doting wife, but her eyes kept darting over to our side of the room. Specifically, she was staring at Thomas. I kept my expression neutral and used my peripheral vision to observe Thomas. He was looking back at her. There was definitely something going on between them. My mind raced back to my previous life. On the day my baby passed away, Thomas had left the hospital to visit an acquaintance who had been admitted. Not long after he left, Jenna had slipped into my room and caused tragedy. I hadn't thought twice about it back then. Thomas and Jenna had known each other for years. Their interactions had always seemed completely normal. But thinking about it now, the pieces were falling into a concerning picture. I originally met Thomas at one of Jenna's parties. She had invited a group of people, and introduced Thomas as a friend from university who was single. She was the one who encouraged us to date, but looking at them now, that narrative seemed misleading. Before that, Jenna and I were just casual college roommates. She had started dating early on and moved out. As the realization dawned on me, a nervous chill washed over me. What if Thomas and Jenna had been secretly connected this whole time? If that was true, my earlier worries were even deeper. It would explain why Jenna had followed me to this hospital. But it didn't explain why Thomas hadn't stopped her from her medical choices. My head was throbbing. I decided to push it aside and handed the baby over to Mary, our new night nurse. "Thank you so much for coming," I whispered. Mary was professional and warm, tending to the baby with absolute care. On the other side of the curtain, Jenna was a completely different story. She had gained weight during pregnancy, and her milk supply started right after birth. The problem was, she didn't even bother with privacy in a room full of people. And of course, she couldn't resist a comment at me. "Formula is nothing compared to natural nursing. And looking at what you bought, it's not even top tier." I had spent months researching the exact high-quality formula I bought. Tearing other people down was clearly the only way she felt good about herself. I wasn't about to correct her. Mary had just finished changing my baby's diaper and was gathering his tiny outfits. She glanced over when she heard Jenna's comments. Jenna immediately seized the opportunity. "Mary, if you quit and come work for me right now, I'll pay you $10,000 a month." Deal. It was a high offer. I was paying her $6,000. If Mary accepted, I couldn't blame her, but I knew exactly what Jenna was doing. She wasn't just looking for help. She wanted to take Mary away from me. Before Mary could respond, the hospital door opened. Mrs. Higgins had forgotten her house keys and returned just in time to hear Jenna's offer. She entered quickly, looking upset. "Are you trying to insult me? I already told everyone I was going to be the hands-on grandmother. You are not hiring a stranger." Jenna's temper flared. "What good is that? I had complications today because of poor advice." Mrs. Higgins raised her voice. "My son is a massive success, isn't he? And who raised him? Me. I don't need you telling me what to do." Jenna immediately started crying, turning to Mark. "Oh my God, if I knew your mother was like this, I never would have married you. Look at how she treats me." Mark shot his mother a stern look. Feeling frustrated, Mrs. Higgins grabbed her designer handbag and left the hospital again. When the room quieted down, I told Mary that if she wanted to take the higher-paying job, I wouldn't hold it against her. Mary shook her head. "I never even considered it. The money is tempting, but no amount of cash is worth dealing with that kind of toxic environment." Relieved, I quietly sent Mary an extra $500 tip. But Mrs. Higgins' exit wasn't the end of the drama. Not even an hour later, Mark's phone rang. It was the police department. His mother had just been involved in a major traffic collision. Mrs. Higgins was likely upset after the argument with Jenna. Driving her large SUV while distracted was a recipe for disaster. According to local news reports, she had run a red light at a busy intersection and collided with a mother riding an electric bike with her child. Thankfully, both were wearing helmets. Though the child sustained a fractured arm, the mother demanded Mrs. Higgins take responsibility. But Mrs. Higgins pulled cash from her purse and threw $100 bills toward the mother. "You're just trying to get money out of me," Mrs. Higgins yelled, captured on a bystander's video. "Is this enough for you?" The mother had crossed legally on a green light. It was entirely Mrs. Higgins' fault for running the red light. The mother didn't touch the money. She immediately called 911. Mrs. Higgins continued her hostile rant before driving away from the scene. Leaving the scene of an accident with injuries was a severe violation, and her behavior was fully recorded. The bystander uploaded the video online, and within an hour it accumulated millions of views. Public outrage grew quickly. "Do people like this actually exist?" One top comment read. Internet users quickly identified her information, noting she was a retired office worker. "That luxury SUV costs over $80,000. That is unusual for a standard pension," someone pointed out. Someone even shared screenshots from the local Facebook group, where Mrs. Higgins had made rude comments earlier. This is terrible. Someone needs to look into their finances. The attention turned toward her son. Mark comments across platforms raised questions. Managers handling bank funds need proper oversight, someone speculated. When Mark arrived at the police station, his mother had been taken into custody. The mother of the injured child was pursuing full legal action. Given the public video and evidence, the case was serious. Mark's difficulties were just beginning. While he was dealing with law enforcement, Jenna was facing her own crisis back at the hospital. While Mark was away, the specialist performed a routine health screening on Jenna's baby. When the doctor returned, his expression was serious. He informed Jenna that the baby showed clear signs of severe neurological complications and developmental delays. Jenna stared at the medical report, refusing to accept it. "Your equipment is wrong. How could my baby have complications?" she shouted, her voice echoing down the hall. The doctor tried to stay calm and empathetic. "The causes are complex, but preliminary findings suggest that due to the prolonged labor and complications during delivery, the infant experienced a severe lack of oxygen." Before the doctor finished, Jenna lashed out and struck him across the face. "You're lying. Natural birth is supposed to be fine. It is impossible for my child to have issues because of natural labor." Assaulting medical staff crossed every line. The doctor swallowed his frustration and maintained his composure. "I quietly raised my phone from under my blanket and recorded the scene." The doctor took a deep breath. "Ma'am, before delivery, our team advised you to opt for a C-section due to high risks. When complications arose, we requested consent for emergency care, but consent was repeatedly refused. Our options were limited." Jenna lost control of her emotions entirely, knocking items off tables and yelling about legal action. Just then, Mark walked back into the room looking exhausted and overwhelmed. Seeing his wife causing a scene, he stepped in and confronted her sharply. "Can you stop for 1 second? My mother is in custody and everything is falling apart. Stop making things worse." Jenna reacted angrily, scratching Mark's face in frustration. "You deserve it. If your mother hadn't insisted on ignoring medical advice, my baby wouldn't have complications." Mark looked at her with disbelief. "You were the one who argued with her and made her leave in the first place." Jenna refused to back down. "So what? She was unhelpful anyway." In a fit of panic and rage, Jenna grabbed a pair of sharp medical shears from the nearby tray. She swung the shears wildly toward Mark, striking him in the chest. The room descended into chaos. Mark collapsed as staff rushed in, blaring emergency alarms. Security guards quickly subdued Jenna, holding her down until medical personnel could assist. My hands shook as I stopped the recording on my phone. Suddenly, Thomas was standing beside my bed. Ever since Mary arrived, I had been finding reasons to keep Thomas at a distance. I was uncertain whether I could trust him. He looked at my phone, his expression calm. "Are you going to post that online?" I held the phone close. "Are you going to try to stop me?" I asked coldly. Thomas shook his head. "You're overthinking. Everything happening is a result of her own actions. Even if you don't post it, others were filming." He was right. Several people in the hallway had recorded the event. Thomas looked exhausted, carrying deep dark circles under his eyes. He guided my wheelchair out of the room and into a quiet hallway. He took a deep breath. "Your concerns weren't entirely wrong. Jenna and we dated briefly back in college. But as time went on, she wanted a lifestyle I couldn't provide then. She constantly complained about money and status, and then she met Mark. Before we even ended things, she moved on with him. She liked Mark's wealth, but missed the care I gave her. She introduced us at that party hoping it would clear her mind. But when she saw us build a happy, stable life together, she became resentful and reached out again." I listened, silently. "And what did you want?" I asked quietly. He looked at me sincerely. "I chose you. I chose our family. Jenna was part of the past. Her messages worried me because I feared losing you if you misunderstood. But when you told me about your warnings and instincts, I realized I needed to focus entirely on protecting you and our son. That explained why he didn't hesitate to help us transfer hospitals. Then why did Jenna go into labor early? I asked. Thomas's expression darkened, because when I stepped away for a moment, I caught Jenna standing over our baby's crib. She was trying to harm him. I rushed over and pushed her away from our son. She stumbled back and the sudden shock caused her water to break. Everything finally made sense. He hadn't betrayed us, he had saved our child. I took a deep, shaky breath and looked at him. If anyone ever tries to hurt our child again, we handle it through proper channels immediately. Understand? Thomas nodded. I understand, I promise. Thanks to rapid medical care, Mark survived the incident. The shears had missed critical organs, though he required emergency surgery and days of intensive care to recover. Jenna's actions resulted in law enforcement intervention. Given her medical state and emotional breakdown, she was placed under a mandatory psychiatric hold, under police supervision. Meanwhile, my recovery went smoothly, my vitals normalized, and our baby was healthy and growing well. A few days later, Thomas brought the car around and we were officially discharged. Stepping into the fresh air holding our healthy baby felt like a fresh start. We had protected our family and left the nightmare behind. We moved to a secure home in a quiet neighborhood and relocated our business inventory. We cut off contact with anyone associated with Jenna. Over the following weeks, news reports revealed the full outcome for Jenna's family. The investigation sparked by Mrs. Higgins' accident uncovered extensive financial fraud. Mark had been embezzling client funds at his bank to finance their extravagant lifestyle. Federal authorities seized their assets, including the luxury home and cars. Mrs. Higgins faced severe legal consequences for her hit and run, and was sentenced to prison time. Mark faced multiple financial crime charges and federal prison time. Jenna was left with no resources, no home, and no support system. The financial accounts were frozen, and the luxury home was foreclosed. Months later, facing overwhelming hardship, isolation, and unmanaged health issues, Jenna reached a breaking point. In a tragic conclusion reported on the news, Jenna and her child passed away after a fall from the top floor of the abandoned property. When Thomas and I saw the news, we felt no joy, only a quiet sadness for how destructive selfishness and envy had been. Since no family members came forward, Thomas and I quietly paid for a modest memorial service and cremation for them. Standing under the open sky, holding Thomas's hand, I felt the last remnants of the past fade away. I hoped for peace and a better path in whatever comes next.